Welcome to the third option.
We're glad to be back here again, and we think this is going to be a real blessing. I'm excited about the topic today. I'm Rick, and I'm with
With it, you're with
I'm with my wife Judy.
Judy. So we've been talking about shame the last couple of weeks and how Jesus overcomes the scapegoat system, which is often utilized in conjunction with shame. And today we're starting a new subject that sort of kind of ties
Yeah,
in. It's We're titling this Unrighteous
unrighteous
Judgment.
judgment. Um, we know, sort of jumping to the end, that Jesus brings in righteous judgment. The Bible talks about that. So before that, what we have in the world is unrighteous judgment. And of course, it still operates today. And there again, it is the result of the common issue of shame that humans are trying to deal with. This is where the judgment, uh, wrongful judgment, comes from. It's very much like the scapegoating. In fact, scapegoating is a part of unrighteous judgment, and it comes because we don't it comes because we don't use all the ingredients necessary to have righteous judgment. We
Mm-hmm.
use only the ingredients necessary to have an unrighteous judgment.
Yeah, if we go back to Genesis 3, where Adam and Eve ate of the apple or of the fruit, it says in the New Living Translation, at that moment their eyes were opened and they suddenly felt shame at their nakedness.
Mhm.
So they'd been naked the whole time and didn't feel shame. Now they feel shame. And if you notice what they did immediately was they judged themselves,
Mhm.
and they judged themselves unrighteously.
Unworthy. And see, and what have we been talking about? Shame is that feeling of being unworthy or not being good enough, being unlovable. So they hid from God.
Mm-hmm.
And they did so because, now notice, it's interesting, they this happened only after they chose the knowledge of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so with that knowledge of good and evil, this is what we get that so that we can judge. Eve looked at it and said, this was something that was desirable to make one wise, to cause us to know things. And so
Mm-hmm.
their eyes were open, they were able to see. Well,
Mm-hmm.
you look around, what is so easy for people to see
What's
nowadays?
wrong?
What's
What's wrong
wrong?
with
What's wrong with
it?
people?
Uh-huh.
But if you look in the mirror, you can be a very attractive person, but if you're the one looking in the mirror, you can find what's wrong uh, with your face. You might have one little blemish or a pimple or something like that, and it seems like it's a big light shining that everybody's going
Mm-hmm.
to notice first. We can spot what's wrong, and the reason for that is that we have this we uh, I'll talk about Adam and Eve. They had this knowledge of good and evil, but they did not eat of the tree of life.
Mm-hmm.
And in the tree of life is God. That's him, his heart. It's love, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Now, God said later on, he says, so the man has become like one of us to know good and evil. So God knows good and evil,
Mm-hmm.
but God is love.
Right.
So God can know right and wrong. He can know, he can see all these things, but because he is love, he is gracious, he's merciful, he's forgiving. And we see that um, revealed through Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of person he is. That's the kind of person our Creator, our Father, is. But man, without the love, all we've got is the knowledge of good and evil, so we're able to point things out. And as you said, usually it's we easily can see what's wrong with things
Mm-hmm.
or what's wrong with people, and that brings what we would call negativity into everything. So
Again,
judgment starts.
yeah, a negative bias, which it seems like humanity has.
Yeah. And with that knowledge of good and evil, we became judges,
Yeah,
but we became unrighteous judges and unfair judges.
because of the lack of love. I love that you point that out, that there's an ingredient missing
Hmm.
when you're just focused on the good and the
Hmm.
evil. And you look at even in the Old Testament when, Abraham did things that were wrong, and God could have immediately punished him for the
for every wrong
wrong.
thing that
Yeah.
he does. Yeah,
Like even, he gives his wife up as his sister, and lies about it. But it's almost like God blessed him. And you think, oh, if you're looking at through eyes of only good and evil, that's unfair. Like he didn't get punished for doing something wrong.
and of course, you look at our redemption. You look at Jesus, who reveals the Father, and
Yeah.
look what the whole everything about the cross speaks. It's grace and mercy,
Hmm.
remission and forgiveness of sin. So that's the true heart of the Father. In fact, that's His real way of justice and judgment, which we'll get into uh, later on. But I like that you brought that up because see, when we have a religion that's only that's that's primarily based on right and wrong, or what we have then is a morality code, and
Hmm.
either you live up to this code or you don't. And we see that's essentially what was going on when Jesus came on the scene back in his day. They have a woman caught in sin, they say,
Hmm.
and they said, the law demands that she be killed, she be
Hmm.
stoned to death. That's a morality code. There's no mercy in it. There's no love in it. There's no compassion. There's
No
no
forgiveness.
forgiveness.
Yeah.
Nothing. But Jesus, revealing the heart of the Father, says, "I do not condemn you."
Hmm.
And uh, and then in another place, when they pressed Jesus, like, by what authority do you do these things? He says, "I say what I hear my Father say. I do what I see my Father do." So he was the revealing of the true Creator, the true God,
Hmm.
and so that's why his judgment was very, very, very different than what man does. And so we get that knowledge of good and evil, and we become judges. Well, who's the closest one to us? Who are we going to judge first?
Ourselves.
Ourselves, yeah. And so that's what exactly that picture that we see in Genesis 3 is, that their eyes were open, they could see what was wrong,
Hmm.
and they tried to cover themselves because of the shame. They tried to hide in the bushes
Hmm.
because of their shame, and none of the covering and none of the hiding effectively dealt with the shame.
Hmm.
And so they judge themselves first, and when God approaches, they judge themselves unworthy of God. And
Hmm.
so after that, every people, because they judge unrighteously, judge
Hmm.
wrongly, they judge God wrongly, right?
Hmm.
Have you ever judged God wrongly?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have. He was a horrible God. He was a
Yeah.
vengeful
You
God. He
had
was,
favorites, and I wasn't one
and
of
I
them.
wasn't one of them either. And he was
Hmm.
punitive, and he was, and even according to a lot of the things that I heard from people who I believe also were misjudging God, it gave me the impression that he did not like me.
Hmm.
And because of the good and evil, because
Hmm.
I had done too much evil.
Yeah.
And so according to that code, according to that knowledge, um, I I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. I'm not
Yeah.
lovable, especially to a God who knows everything about me. Now, I could fool some people around me that
Hmm.
don't have to know everything about me. They might think I'm just okay, but they don't know everything about me.
Right.
And so uh, there again, that goes back to why I lived carrying shame inside of myself, because I felt that there were things about me that were simply unlovable,
Hmm.
and so carried that shame. But it didn't stop me from being a judge,
Hmm.
because we carry this knowledge of good and evil. So I judged myself, and I judged other people, and that whole thing goes on, and that's what we do. And we, like we've talked about before, we judge ourselves as uh, unworthy of certain things, but then we compare ourselves, and then we judge other people, and it gives us a bit of relief, or we think it does, to judge them as less than us in some areas. And so all this judging is going on, and Jesus comes along and says, don't judge,
Hmm.
because however you're going to judge, that same way it can be judged against you too.
Hmm.
And that's what he showed with the
Well, and in a lot of
Pharisees.
ways, when you're judging other people, it's almost revealing that you judge yourself. you're judging
Hmm.
yourself, but you're kind of taking it out on someone else.
Yeah.
I love that you brought up the point of the morality code, like living um, under this, morality code. There's something very cold about it that, this is right and it's just right and this is the way it's got to be. And there's no warmth to it. There's
Hmm.
no grace. There's no forgiveness. There's no love there. It's just this hard and cold. Um, and I think what happened with the Pharisees is that judging brought them this knowledge that puffed them up. It didn't edify others. It was like,
Hmm.
we're the ones to be admired,
Hmm.
we're the ones to, be given the best seat in the house, and we should be honored for our you know great flesh, that we're able to do these
And it has
morality
it
codes
has a
well.
look of piety.
Yeah, but then it doesn't edify other people.
There
It
you
sort
go.
of separates me from them.
Hmm.
And that, I think, is what Jesus wanted to show, the falsity of that, and
Yeah.
to show that that is
Yeah.
not what the Father's heart is like.
Yeah. And there again, we see it in that picture of the woman caught in adultery. Because he tells the woman, "I don't condemn you," but then he turns to the people and he says, well, before that, actually, he says, "You that has no sin, cast the first stone," and they realized that they were guilty of sin too. So that's what he meant when he says, "Don't judge," because that same judgment can work against you too.
Right.
And he brought that out. But notice also, even though now all parties are guilty, the woman was guilty of adultery, and they were guilty of whatever sins that they were thinking of at the time. They got to walk away, and so did the woman. See, none of them got killed, none of them got punished for
Hmm.
it,
Hmm.
and Jesus let them all walk. And like you said, he was demonstrating the love of the Father, because the Bible says knowledge puffs up, but love edifies.
Hmm.
Knowledge causes the religious, like the Pharisees, and even those of us in our day. See, we pore over the scriptures like they did. We debate the scriptures. We study them. We think we know things, And of course, the Bible says, if anybody thinks he knows something, he knows nothing the way he ought to know them, because the real knowledge of all things is in God Himself. And so it's very easy for us, even as Christians, to gain lots of biblical knowledge
Hmm.
and think that we know something. And we can get in that Bible and we can find lots of rules to follow. And we say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and to follow that. And if we're going to do it, then we can demand that other people do that too. And so
Hmm.
there's that judgment. And those who don't fulfill all the rules as well as we do, we can judge them, and we'll judge them as, on an unrighteous level.
Like that's
And
inferior.
it goes on. And that's why, um, frankly, religion, especially Christian religion, is known for having a lot of holier than thou people. And I don't think people set out to be that way, but they just believe what they believe, and they've got this knowledge. But the Bible also says, and knowledge puffs us up, but love edifies.
Hmm.
And 1 Corinthians 13 says, if I have all knowledge and understand mysteries, but have love, it's not nothing. And I'm really
Have
nothing
not love.
and have not love. So love is the whole thing that makes the difference. It's what makes the judgment accurate.
Hmm.
Now, as we've discovered the graciousness of God's heart, what do we find happening to our own heart? We find ourselves having much more empathy, right?
Hmm.
We find ourselves having much more understanding
Hmm.
of the human condition. So
Even of
there's,
ourselves, I think,
yes, we're gracious enough to ourselves, even.
hmm.
Right. And we're aware that we're weak and foolish.
Hmm.
We're aware that we make mistakes. I'm aware that I can get selfish sometimes. I don't like it. I don't want to be that way. But my flesh is still weak.
Hmm.
But I'm still valuable and precious as a person. And to God, I can see why, to God, who is love, I'm not worthy of torment. I'm not worthy of punishment and worthy of death. God loves me. He has empathy. He has understanding. In fact, He created us weak
Mhm.
and foolish in comparison to him. That's why the whole plan was for us to be joined to him, one with him, so that he would be our strength. And
Mhm.
that's who we would rely on. And if we find that out, we fall in love with him. And it's
Mhm.
beautiful and it's natural. Love is what it's about. Love is the third option.
Mhm.
Love is what makes all the difference.
Let's talk a little bit about discerning of spirits. Okay,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
I I think we've all known people who feel like they can discern different spirits, and sometimes that discerning is a little warped if it doesn't include love, right?
Yeah, and we've seen that where it, we've seen the people. They're like, I've got the gift of discerning of spirits, and I can tell what's wrong with people,
Mhm.
and they've got a spirit of this and a spirit of that, and this.
The funny thing is all humans can see what's wrong. I mean, that's not a super spiritual gift. It's it's seeing what's behind it
Yeah,
is what's
and the discerning. We see Jesus.
mysterious.
Excuse me. We see Jesus showing us what that looks like when they were in Samaria, and James and John were wanting to kill all the Samaritans and burn them up.
Call down fire because Elijah did it, and that
Mhm.
was biblical. So
Yeah.
why don't we
So
do that?
they figured that watch that here's something important for people to think about. They thought that, well, since the Samaritans willingly rejected him, that they were worthy of being burned up by fire. And Jesus didn't agree with that. That's
Yeah.
an interesting point for us to ponder. But
Hmm.
anyway, um,
Yeah,
uh,
because the Samaritans
they rejected
rejected
him.
him.
Yeah.
They didn't open their home to him. They
Mhm.
didn't want anything to do with him. And I think James and John they felt justified that
Yeah.
they should be punished for that.
And
They
they
should be
judged
harmed
the
for that.
Samaritans as unworthy of living.
Hmm.
And so, but Jesus says, you don't know, watch
What
this,
spirit you're
what
of?
spirit you're of.
Yeah.
So he was discerning between the spirits. And he said,
Yes.
you guys are operating by the wrong spirit right now.
Uh-huh.
Instead of being like me, who has come to bring justification to these people, you're coming bringing accusation. So, so we will primarily operate either by the spirit of the accuser or the justifier, which is
Hmm.
Jesus,
Yes.
his spirit.
Hmm.
And so, he says, you're not operating by my spirit. You're
Hmm.
totally the opposite of what I'm about right now.
Hmm.
You don't even realize, because you think you're doing good,
Hmm.
because you've got a knowledge of good and evil, and you believe these people should do good. You guys are doing good. You're following me like I asked you
Hmm.
to, and you're dropped everything and you did it, and you think they should do it too. That's how you're judging it.
Right.
And he says, so you've got this knowledge, and they
Hmm.
should have. It would have been best if they would have accepted him, listened to him, received him. It would have been best. But they judged that
Hmm.
without the love that Jesus was carrying.
Yeah.
And so he said, you don't know what spirit you're operating in. You're operating in the spirit of love, or the spirit that justifies the
Well, and I
ungodly.
also think they're forgetting God's patience. And
Hmm.
Jesus seemed to have patience towards these Samaritans who didn't immediately open up their homes to him, but later on they did receive
Yeah,
him
yeah.
with the woman at the well.
Oh
Or I'm
yeah,
not sure. Am
yeah.
I in the
That
right
was yeah,
timeline?
that was Samaria. In fact, they begged him to stay longer,
Yeah.
right?
So I think
So
that's
Jesus had the plan. The justifier had the right way to
yeah,
do
yeah, yeah.
it.
I think that's something to consider when maybe I want to put a judgment on someone like they just, don't get it or they just don't love God. So they should, we just throw them away. Is to think about the patience of God, that person is just a pre knower of God, just
Yeah,
a pre and their God is being patient to convince their hearts of his presence and his love for them. And I can have that patience
yeah.
as well.
And without that love, without the love of God, we don't see people correctly. So I
Mhm.
didn't even see myself correctly
Yeah.
for a long time in my life, um, until I caught a glimpse of God's grace and His love. Then I could start seeing who more of how He sees me,
Hmm.
and that changed my perspective of me. I quit becoming a condemner of myself.
Mhm.
And if I'm not condemning myself, there's no need to condemn other people. I can start to look at other people and see them in a different way and see
Mhm.
them more as God does. And that's really that's what I've found is the propulsion and motivator for forgiveness that empowers us to forgive. For
Mhm.
me personally, it's been when I can see how God sees them, because if it's hard for me to forgive someone, it's because it's hard for me to take my eyes off of what they've done wrong.
Mhm.
See, I'm judging that,
Mhm.
and it hurts, and I get offended by it, and and it's hard to take my eyes off of that unless there's a greater power than that working, and that love allows me to see what God sees, and what
Yeah.
God will see, even in a person that has done something harmful. God will can still see past that and see the precious human that's
Mhm.
behind that, and actually know why this person who was doing their best did something that may have been offensive to me.
Yeah.
And
I think about that even with the woman who was caught in adultery. What she did was horrendous. I mean, it was a horrible thing,
yeah.
what she did.
Mhm.
But he saw this human hurt, um, traumatized, whatever the story is, we don't know. He saw that and felt that it was worth it. The woman at the well, I mean, it says he went out of his way to meet this one woman
Mhm.
who'd been in and out of marriages, had five husbands, would be what a lot of people would judge as,
Be easy to judge.
yeah,
She
just,
apparently she was being judged, it
yeah.
seemed.
So, but he saw what was behind that and he had compassion, he had room for her. And there is such love in that and such consideration within that um, relationship that um, I guess it helps me to have that towards myself and to
Mhm.
have that towards other people.
Mhm.
Not that I'm making excuses for people's bad behavior, like, oh, well, they had a hard childhood, so they should be excused. It's not that. It's just understanding.
Mhm.
And and I feel like God gives you ways to love people in those
Oh,
situations
yeah.
that
You do.
is
You have
effective.
compassion.
Yeah.
And it's not excuses for what we do, but it's reasons. It's understanding that
Mhm.
God understands. And so if there are reasons behind maybe the selfish or harmful things that we do, then God wanted to deal with those reasons. And it
Yes,
goes back to that shame,
to healing
the
and
judging.
making whole the
Mhm.
thing that is propelling the sinful
Right.
behavior. I agree. Yeah.
That's why love is the healer. Love is the restorer. Love is God. Love is everything in its life, and that's why when the word said that knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. That situation he was talking about, there were people, these Christians, these believers, who were like, well, we have this knowledge. We know more than some of these weaker Christians, and they it puffed them up. They felt like they were better. He says,
Mhm.
okay, so you know some things. He says,
Mhm.
but what about these people? So let's choose to operate in love.
Mhm.
Let's care about them rather than just flaunt, our knowledge that we
Mhm.
have, and however we deal with this, let's deal with it in a way that's edifying to them rather than a way that separates us as well. We're better than them. See, that's unrighteous judgment again.
Mhm.
But love brings in righteous judgment.
Right.
We can always say we're better than someone because we know something more. We it's not hard to see that kind of pride in our Christian religion.
Mhm.
I know I've caught it in myself many times,
Mhm.
and it's just that pride feels like an antidote for the shame, to make you
Yeah.
feel superior. But love is the thing that builds up, and Paul was adjuring the people there in First Corinthians, like, okay, so we're smart. I have knowledge about that stuff too, but let's care about these
He
people.
was talking about the idols, food that was offered to
Yeah.
idols. Is that what it was?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
food that was offered to idols, and he said, "Now we know those idols are no thing. So this food where they've taken part of it and they've sacrificed it to idols and they're selling the rest of the animal in the market. People like, I'm not touching that." And so some of the believers they knew, well, that's no big deal. So there's no those idols are nothing. So the meat's okay to eat. but there were others that were afraid of it.
Mhm.
And so those that had knowledge, Paul said, I know that there's
Mhm.
nothing to that, but let's care about them. He says,
Mhm.
if it bothers them, then
Mhm.
let's consider that, and let's love them. Essentially, is
Mhm.
what he was saying. He's saying we can choose knowledge, or we can choose love,
Mhm.
and love is what is real. Love edifies.
Yeah.
Knowledge gives you a false sense of something, and it
Yeah.
brings on always unrighteous
Judgment.
judgment.
So interesting. Even in understanding grace or coming into this revelation of grace, I feel like I have used that at times as a way of, I know something more than I used to know when I was more in legalism. And so it kind of, I found myself at times sort of judging people who didn't see
We call
grace.
that grace legalism. We move over
Yes,
into that.
yes.
Like,
And
oh,
I
now I
don't,
know grace. Now I've
yeah,
got it. Now,
no, I
now,
hate that.
now I
But I
understand.
remember one time my friend Michelle, she was going through something, and I was talking to her. In some way, I said offhandedly, like, "Oh, don't worry, you'll see it one day. Like it'll come to you. You'll get this revelation
That
to you."
sounded condescending to
And
her.
she told me, yeah, she said, "This, it sounds like," I forget exactly how she said it, but it made me aware of how I was coming across.
Yeah.
Instead of just sitting with her in her
Hmm.
difficult situation, I wanted to fix it. And
Hmm.
I wanted to fix it by extending this knowledge that I have that she didn't have, and it wasn't edifying for her.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that she let me know that, and it helped me kind of step back and consider that.
And see, love does that work in us too. We learn those lessons,
Yeah.
and it causes us to want to choose love because we've
Hmm.
tasted and seen the goodness of that, and we want to judge righteously. And
Hmm.
what we find out as we judge righteously, and we'll talk more about righteous judgment in our next episode, but as we judge righteously, relationships are so much better
Yeah.
without this unrighteous judgment that's going on, where
Yeah,
people get so
true.
easily offended and all that's going on. So, yeah, our next episode, we'll talk more about the righteous judgment and how Jesus did bring that into us and how it restores. It's a beautiful message. We hope you'll listen to that too. But I love this. I love talking about this
Hmm.
topic here.
Oh,
It's,
just bringing it to your
yeah,
awareness that there is unrighteous judgment and there's righteous
yeah.
judgment. And without love, it's hard to really
And you're going
discern
to
between the
operate
two.
by one spirit or the
The
other.
other.
And unrighteous judgment comes is it originates from the accuser,
Mhm.
and the righteous judgment comes from the justifier,
That's so good.
Jesus.
So good. Thank you for joining us today. We hope this has been an encouragement. And please feel free to reach out to us either through our website, rickmanis.com, or on our social media platforms.
Thanks for tuning in, and have a great day.
We'll see you next time.